Before we discuss the division algorithm, it's important that you know the four different parts of a division problem. So let's make sure you're comfortable with these four different parts and vocabulary words, and then we'll go on and we'll look at the division algorithm and do an example of it. The first thing that you should know is anytime that we're dividing two numbers together, the number in the numerator is what we call the dividend, and the number in the denominator is what we call the divisor. Now, normally this setup, when we're actually doing long division, is going to look like this. So that the dividend is the part being divided into, which is the same thing as the numerator. See the numerator over here, the numerator. The divisor is the part that's doing the dividing, and that's going to be the bit in the denominator. So these are two of the parts of the division algorithm. There's two more parts. The answer to a division problem is what we call the quotient, and you have heard that term before. And then sometimes it's possible that we're left over with something that we call the remainder. Let me extend this a little bit. So the division algorithm has four parts. It has a divisor, it has a dividend. The answer to a division problem is a quotient, and sometimes we'll have a bit that's left over, and if we do, then that bit is called the remainder. Let's do an example of the division algorithm with two whole numbers. So for example, let's say I wanted to divide 638 by 5. Okay, so 638 divided by 5. That is the same thing as saying we have a divisor of 5, so on the outside of the house goes a 5, and we have a dividend of 638. So let's talk about the division algorithm. What is this process to dividing? Here's what we do first. We look at the divisor, and we ask ourselves how many times does the divisor go into the highest place value in the dividend. So how many times does 5 go into 6? And 5 goes into 6 one time. And we're going to put that up here at top. So the first thing that we do is we divide. Now the next step that we do is we multiply. So we're going to say to ourselves, what is 1 times 5? And 1 times 5 will give us 5. The third step to the division algorithm is now we're going to subtract. So we're going to take away that 5 from the 6 and we're left with 1. And the fourth step is that we're going to bring down our next term. So whatever that term is that follows, we're going to bring that down. And we're going to bring that down. Okay, so we have this divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, and then it's a loop, which means we continue. So we're going to continue to do it again. We're going to say to ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 13? There's the division part, and 5 goes into 13 2 times. The next step comes multiply, and 2 times 5 is 10. And then the third step is subtraction, and then we're going to subtract, which gives us 3. And then the fourth step is to bring down, so we're going to bring down our next term, which is 8. And again, we're going to continue to loop this back around again until we're left with a remainder. We'll talk about how we know we have a remainder in a second. Okay, for division, 5 goes into 38 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. And then we're going to subtract, so 38 minus 35 is 3. Now that fourth step, which says bring down, notice I don't have any extra terms to bring down. I'm done with 638. If we wanted to figure out what the decimal representation was, we could put a decimal, put a bunch of zeros, but for all intents and purposes, because we're going to write our answer in fractional form, we're done. Now this 3 is what we call the remainder, and when we write the remainder, we're going to write the remainder over the original divisor. So that's the same thing as saying 127 3/5. Now something we might be asked to do is this idea of checking. So let's talk about how we can check a division problem. Well, there's an old saying that we call DQ plus R that will help us check our division problem. And here's what that means. If we ever want to check a division problem, we take the divisor, we multiply the divisor by the quotient, and then we add the remainder. And this DQ plus R should give us the original dividend, that we started with. Okay, so dividend is equal to divisor times the quotient plus the remainder. Well, let's check our work for this example that we just did. We want to check and make sure that 638 divided by 5 is indeed equal to 127 3/5. Well, let's check. So the dividend is 638. The divisor is 5. The quotient, which is the whole number answer, is 127. And recall we had a remainder of 3. That was a little bit left over. So if this is true, then our check works. So we have 638 is equal to 127 times 5 plus 3. Let's check and see if that's true. So I'm going to put a little question mark there. Well, 127 times 5 is equal to 635 plus 3. And that's the same thing as saying 638. So it checks. DQ plus R.